Picture this, it's a Tuesday, your car breaks down, timing belt gone, which if you're not familiar with cars is basically the automotive equivalent of your heart stopping. Expensive, urgently needs fixing. Now, if you're a financially sensible person with an emergency fund, this is annoying. You call the garage, you pay the bill, you slightly wince at the number, and then you get on with life. Which, to be clear, I was not always that person. This is a full-blown crisis. You're doing mental gymnastics at midnight, trying to figure out whether you can cover it on a credit card, whether you should ask a family member, whether you can just delay it and use public transport for a bit in England in February. Grim. It's not just the money that's the problem. It's the stress, the lost sleep, the cascading effect where you fix one thing using debt and spend the next 3 months digging yourself back out while simultaneously trying not to have anything else go wrong, which of course it does, because that's life. An emergency fund fixes all of this. Not the broken timing belt, that's still annoying, but it turns a crisis into an inconvenience. And that distinction, as it turns out, is worth a very significant amount of money and an even more significant amount of peace of mind. Today we're talking about how to build one. Let's go. I'm Leo. Welcome back to Financially Fit Millennial, where we talk about money without the jargon, without the judgment, and occasionally with a slightly painful personal antidote or two. Today we're covering emergency funds, which I know sounds about as exciting as a dentist appointment, but is genuinely one of the most important financial moves you can make. And I'm going to argue properly, within reason, that it should come before investing. Bear with me, it'll make sense in a minute. Right, let's start with what an emergency fund actually is, because it's one of those things that sounds obvious, but is worth properly defining. An emergency fund is a pot of money kept separate from your everyday spending and your investments that exists purely to cover unexpected emergency expenses. Job loss, car breaking down, washing machine dying, because of course it always does, unexpected medical costs, any of the lovely surprises life occasionally lobbing at you when you're least expecting it. It's not a rainy day fund for treats, it's not money you dip into when you see something you want on sale, it's specifically for genuine emergencies, things that would otherwise require you to go into debt or make desperate financial decisions under pressure. It's like always having an umbrella in your bag. Most days it just sits there doing absolutely nothing if you're in Thailand, but the one day life decides to absolutely bucket down on you, you're very grateful you packed it. The key characteristics are it's cash, it's accessible immediately, not locked up in a 30-day notice account or an investment that might be down 20% when you need it, and it's specifically ring-fenced so you actually leave it alone until you need it. That last bit is harder than it sounds, by the way. We'll come back to that. Now, here's the bit I know some of you are going to want to argue with, because you've watched the compound interest video, you understand that time in the market matters, and you're itching to get your money working. I get it and I respect it. But hear me out, because building an investment portfolio without an emergency fund is a bit like building a house on sand. The house might look great for a while, but the moment there's any kind of storm, the whole thing becomes considerably more stressful. Here's the practical problem. Let's say you put $3,000 into an index fund, no emergency fund. Then your washing machine goes. You need $1,200 immediately. You have two options. Option one, you sell some of your investments, which might be fine, or it might be that the market has dropped 20% since you bought in and you're now selling at a loss, locking that loss in permanently because you had no choice. The one scenario every long-term investor is supposed to avoid, selling at the bottom under pressure, and you've walked straight into it through entirely preventable circumstances. Option two, you put it on a credit card. Now you've got a high interest debt, which we've covered in previous videos, costs you significantly more than you'd expect once interest starts compounding against you. Neither of those options are good. Both of them were entirely avoidable. When you have an emergency fund, neither of those situations arises. The washing machine gets fixed, the investment stays invested. Compound interest keeps compounding. That's the boring, unsexy, completely correct way to do it. The emergency fund is not competing with your investment portfolio, it's protecting it. Right, so you're convinced you need one. Good. How much should it actually be? Because this is where you'll get a lot of different answers depending on who you ask, and I want to give you a sensible framework rather than just a number. Standard advice is 3 to 6 months of essential expenses, not 3 to 6 months of everything you spend, just the essentials: rent, mortgage, utilities, food, transport, insurance, the non-negotiables. 3 months is the minimum, 6 is more comfortable. Some people, particularly those who are self-employed, have variable income, work in volatile industries, or have dependents, probably want closer to 9 or 12 months, because the risk of being without income for an extended period of time is meaningfully higher. Here's the most useful question I can give you for figuring out your number. If you lost your job tomorrow, how long would it realistically take you to find a similar role? If you're in a sector with loads of demand and you could probably walk into something within a month, 3 months of expenses might be completely fine. If you're in a specialized field where roles take time to come up and interviews take time to complete, you probably want 6 months minimum. And don't be tempted to undercalculate your monthly expenses. People are systematically terrible at estimating what they actually spend. Go through your bank statement, actually go through it, not guess, and add up the real numbers. Then be slightly honest with yourself about the fact that emergencies often involve additional costs on top of your normal outgoings. For a lot of people, that works out to be somewhere between $2,000 and $10,000, depending on your lifestyle and where you live. If you live in London or New York, adjust upwards accordingly, because everything there seems to cost twice as much as it should. Okay, you've decided on your number. Now, where do you actually keep this money? Because this matters more than people think, and there are a couple of ways to subtly get it wrong. Option 1, easy access saving account. This is the most common answer and generally the right one. A separate saving account, ideally at a different bank to your current account, which I'll explain in a second, that earns a reasonable interest rate and can be accessed within a working day or two if you need it. The reason I suggest a different bank account is purely psychological. If your emergency fund is one tap away in the same app as your spending account, it requires genuine willpower to leave it alone. If it's slightly more friction, a different login, a different app, a transfer that takes a day, you're probably less likely to dip into it for non-emergencies. Out of sight, not entirely out of mind, but a bit more effort to access, and that matters. Option 2, a cash ISA if you're in the UK, or a high yield saving account if you're in the US or Australia. If interest rates are reasonable, putting your emergency fund in a cash ISA or high yield saving account means it's still completely accessible, but also earning something while it sits there. Free money for doing nothing, which is always a good deal. Just make sure it's instant or same day access, not a 30 or 90-day notice account, because when you need your emergency fund, you don't want to discover that you have to wait 3 months to get it. Option 3, under the mattress. No, please don't do that. Not just because it earns nothing, but because if your house burns down, the money is gone, which would be an emergency, a bank account. Definitely use a bank account. Right, this is the bit people find hardest. Not understanding the concept, but actually doing it. Because if building an emergency fund was easy, that stat that I showed on screen of about half of Americans not being able to cover $1,000 expense wouldn't exist. So let me give you something practical. Step 1, start with a small achievable target. If your eventual goal is 6 months of expenses, and that works out to say $8,000, staring at a number from zero is deeply uninspiring. So don't start there. Start with 1,000. Just get 1,000 first. $1,000 in an emergency fund changes your situation meaningfully. You can cover most car repairs, most washing machine call outs, most of the common unexpected expenses that derail people. It won't cover everything, but it covers a lot. And once you've got 1,000, the next 1,000 feels considerably more achievable because you've already proved to yourself that you can do it. Step 2, automate it. Same principle as investing. Set up a standing order that moves a fixed amount into your emergency fund on the day your salary lands, before you can spend it, before you've even thought about it. Even $50 a month, even $25 a month. The amount matters less than the consistency. $25 a month is $300 a year. In 3 years, that's close to 1,000. Not glamorous, but it works. Step 3, give it a boring name. This sounds ridiculous, but there is evidence that naming saving accounts affects how likely you are to leave them alone. Calling it emergency fund, do not touch, is considerably more effective than calling it savings. Because when you look at it and it says emergency fund, your brain registers that this money has a specific, serious purpose. Whereas savings is much easier to mentally reclassify as money I could probably use for this flight to Ibiza, which is exactly what happens to most saving accounts, speaking from experience. Step 4, use windfalls. Tax refund, work bonus, birthday money from a relative who still thinks you're 12, sold something on eBay, an unexpected chunk of money that isn't already allocated somewhere should have a significant portion going straight into the emergency fund until it's fully funded. Not all of it, you're allowed to enjoy some of it, but a meaningful chunk, 40-50% minimum. I know this is essentially financial spinach. It's not the exciting part of the meal, but like Popeye, it'll give you some financial muscles. I hope that reference isn't lost on any of the younger generation, but doing this means you'll be grateful for it when the timing belt goes. Now, 3 mistakes I see people make with an emergency fund, because building one is only half the job. The other half is not quietly dismantling it for non-emergency emergencies. Mistake 1, spending it on non-emergencies. And this is a big one. And the tricky thing is that the logic always sounds completely reasonable in the moment. I've had a really hard month, I deserve this holiday. Correct, you might well deserve a holiday. The emergency fund is not the place to get it from. The flights are on sale and I'll only save this much if I book now. The urgency is manufactured. The emergency fund is not for sale chasing. My laptop's 5 years old and it's getting slow. That is not an emergency. That is a I should have been saving separately for a laptop situation. A genuinely good test for whether something qualifies as an emergency fund withdrawal. Would I still absolutely need to pay for this if I just lost my job? If yes, emergency fund. If no, find another way. Mistake 2, not replenishing it after using it. You've used your emergency fund for an actual emergency. Nice. That's what it's there for. Well done for having it. Now here is the boring but important part. You need to rebuild it. The number of people who use their emergency fund once, feel relieved it worked, and then just leave it at whatever depleted level it ended up at is significantly more than you think. Your emergency fund at half capacity is considerably less useful than your emergency fund at full capacity. Emergencies, annoyingly, do not space themselves out politely. Mistake 3, investing the emergency fund. But Leo, if this money is just sitting in a savings account, it's barely keeping up with inflation. Shouldn't I put it somewhere I can actually grow it? Fair. No. The emergency fund's job is not to grow. Its job is to be there immediately in its full amount whenever you need it. An emergency fund that's invested in the market might be down 20% at the exact moment you need it, which means you either take the loss or you decide not to use it and use a credit card instead, which completely defeats the purpose. Boring and accessible. That's the brief. It's not a growth vehicle. Accept this and move on. Right, so you've decided to build your emergency fund. It's sitting there, slightly boring, earning a modest rate of interest, doing absolutely nothing interesting. Perfect. So now what? Now you invest properly without the nagging anxiety that if something goes wrong, you'll have to sell your investments at the worst possible time, without the pressure of needing your money back within 6 months, with the freedom to actually leave your money in the market through the bad patches, which, as we've covered extensively on the channel so far, this is the whole point. The emergency fund doesn't compete with your investment returns. It enables them, because the investor who stays invested through a downturn because they had cash elsewhere to cover life's nonsense, that person ends up with significantly more money than the person who had to sell at the bottom because they had no cushion. Think of the emergency fund as the foundation that makes everything else possible. You wouldn't build a house without foundations. You probably shouldn't build an investment portfolio without them either. Once your emergency fund is fully funded, you automate your investments using dollar cost averaging, which we covered in one of the last videos, and you leave both to do their respective jobs. The investments grow, the emergency fund sits there being reassuring. Everybody wins. Okay, so emergency funds, 3 to 6 months of essential expenses, easy access savings account at a different bank, automate the contributions, name it something boring and leave it alone. Use it only for actual emergencies and rebuild it when you do. It's not exciting, it will not make you rich. It will, however, prevent a broken down car or an unexpected bill from becoming a genuine financial crisis, and it will protect your investments from being liquidated at the worst possible time for the worst possible reason. It is quite genuinely the single most important financial move you can make before you do anything else, and I say that as someone who learned the importance of it the slightly hard way. Link in the description to the FIRE calculator on the website. Once your emergency fund is sorted, that's a great step for figuring out your long-term investment goals. Subscribe if you haven't, drop a comment below. Do you have an emergency fund? And if not, what's stopping you? All right, legends, see you in the next one.